As many of you know, most of the world uses the Gregorian calendar, which was introduced back in 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII. It consists of 365 days divided into 12 months, each with 28 to 31 days. An extra day is added every 4 years to synchronize the Gregorian calendar with the seasonal calendar. Several civilizations knew how to keep track of the celestial bodies and seasons, and were able to figure out that a calendar year has 365 days. The Aztecs, who we already know were actually called the Mexica, had an intricate calendar. And no, it was not used to calculate or predict the end of the world. At least, not in the way you think. What was it used for then? And how many days and months did it have? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I like rambling about topics that people usually tune out. And hey, if we have time, we can go over a very special festival that was only celebrated every 52 years. It's more interesting than it sounds, I promise. So let's get started. I apologize for this, but I kinda misled you earlier when I said that the Mexica had only one intricate calendar. The truth is, they had 2 calendars, each one with a unique purpose and significance. And yes, I'm gonna go over all of them, even this little weird one, and hope that I don't confuse you more. First up is the Tonalpohualli, or the day count. This calendar was found in a codex called the Tonalpohualli, or the Book of Days. A priest, known as a Tonalpohualli, would read from this book and be able to deduce what kind of forces influenced each day. Like, for example, which were auspicious days, which were fasting days, and when would it be appropriate to conduct certain actions, such as sacrifices, soil tilling, and harvests. This calendar was used for divination, and reading it wasn't easy. First there were the signs. There were 20 of them in total, beginning with Xiuhpohualli, the crocodile, and ending with Xochitl, the flower. Each sign was also represented by a deity and a cardinal point. Then there was the number sequence. Although there were only 20 signs, they were counted in a pattern from 1 to 13. After 13, it started again at 1, but it continued on to the next sign instead of starting at the beginning. For example, after 13 Acalt, it continued on to 1 Ocelot, all the way to 13 Miquitzli, and so on and on. The only time 1 crocodile ever repeated was once every 52 years. That last part is going to be a trend. You'll see. Next up is the Xiuhpohualli, also known as the year count. It consisted of 365 days, just like ours, but it was divided into 18 months with 20 days each. These months were called cecempohuallapohuallio, roughly translated as 20 by 20 count. But wait, you may be asking, that only adds up to 360 days. What's up with that? Well, you see, after the cecempohuallapohualli, a 5-day period called the Nemontemi would begin. These 5 days were known as the ones who complete the set in vain, otherwise known as the empty ones. Nevertheless, if you add them all up, you have 365 days. In regards to the cecempohuallapohualli, or veintenas as they're called in Spanish, a few people have attempted to figure it out when each one began and ended in relation to our own calendar. For example, we begin ours on January 1st, around early winter. But what about the Aztec calendar? Well, it's a bit difficult to explain, but I'll give it a go. Essentially, there were these 2 men, Bernardino de Sahagún and Diego Duran. They were both friars and historians who attempted to translate the Aztec calendar. Duran believed that the Aztec calendar began on the 14th of March, while Sahagún pegged the first day, possibly on the 15th of February. So which one is more accurate? Well, it's hard to say, and researchers go back and forth. Sahagún's version was considered to be the most reliable, due to how well put together the Florentine Codex is, and how much information it contains. However, Recently I read this research paper by ANDREA Rodriguez Figueroa, basically disproving Sahagun's version of the cecempohuallapohuallio. She did this by comparing it to actual ecological and meteorological conditions that would have taken place during 16th century Mexico City. Overall, Duran's translation isn't perfect, but is quite likely the most accurate of the two. I am not going to go into much detail on the cecempohuallapohuallio because I have an upcoming video that goes deeper in each veintena and all the festivals and holidays that took place in each one. So stay tuned for that. Now, there's one more thing I need to mention about the Xiuhpohualli before I move on. Aztec years, i.e. Mexica years, were cyclical and not linear like ours, meaning that our years are counted from a point in time and going forward, and we never repeat that number again until we start a new era, like for example going from BCE to CE. So essentially, we don't know when our years will end. Perhaps if we're lucky, someone will see this video in the year 3000. Or maybe not, but we can dream. Now for the Aztecs, they were ceremonial in just about everything. They celebrated the death of a year and the birth of a new one solemnly, as it was part of a grand cycle. This cyclical pattern was also important for the naming of years, as the Aztecs believed that everything conceived by humans or by gods deserved a name. Thus, years could have one of four names: Tochtli, Acald, Tecpald, and Cali, in that order. They were attached to a number from 1 to 13, which they rotated, meaning that one Tochtli would repeat every 52 years. Oh, by the way, Xiuhnelpilli, which you see here in this table, means knot. So this entire column is named the rabbit knot. As you can see, according to the table, the year 2023 in the Aztec calendar is the 11th Acald. And even more interesting, within 2 years in 2025, 13 Cali, it will be the end of this 52-year cycle, a cycle that started back in 1974. I would like to briefly talk about the cycle of Venus. In Nahuatl, it was called the Xiuhnelpilli, or the Huixachtécatl. Either name is correct, as the name for Venus was both Xiuhnelpil and Huixachtécatl. First of all, it wasn't quite a calendar, and the Aztec/Mexica did not use it like one. At least, they did not use it like the Tonalpohualli and the Xiuhpohualli. Its main purpose was to, as the name suggests, keep track of the planet Venus, which unlike other planets can be easily seen with the naked eye. The Maya had this system too, and could have possibly been the engineers behind it. But back to topic. The Venus count consisted of 584 days in a 5-year cycle rotation. Essentially what this means is that once Venus was spotted in the morning sky, i.e. the morning star, it would take a total of 584 days for the planet to return to that exact position. So what's up with the 5-year cycle? Well, that can be explained with a mathematical equation. 5 years in the Venus count is the equivalent of 8 terrestrial years, or as we now know them as Xiuhpohuallis. The 5 years had names, of course, just like the Xiuhpohualli, and they even used the 20 signs and 1 to 13 numerical rotations, just like the Tonalpohualli, except the numbers went backwards. These years were called Acald, Cowald, Olin, Atla, and Cipactli. So, in the end, what was the Venus cycle used for? Sources disagree here, but it seems like the Aztecs used the position of Venus for agricultural reasons. Think about this. In many parts of the world, all 4 seasons can be easily distinguished. But in the Valley of Mexico, with its humid temperate climate, that is not always the case. In fact, it would seem that they only had 2 seasons, dry and wet. Don't get me wrong, measuring the sun's position was useful, but adding another element to it, in this case Venus, allowed many Mesoamerican cultures to measure time more accurately. We spoke a little bit about it earlier, but every 52 years something special happens. Every 52 years the Xiuhpohualli and the Tonalpohualli synchronize. This alignment was called Xiuhnelpilli, roughly translated as nodding of the years, or just simply year knot. Of course, being so rare, this was cause for celebration. Remember earlier I mentioned that the Aztec calendar did not predict the end of the world? Well, there's some truth and fiction in that thought. It is true that the Aztec calendar measured the end of time, but you all now know that they measure time in cycles, and after the death of a cycle, a new one began. And thus, we have the new fire ceremony. I really would like to go in full detail on this ceremony, but this video is getting a little too long. So perhaps that's another thing to add to the list of videos we have yet to finish. In the meantime, all you need to know about the new fire ceremony is that it involved putting out all the fires in the city, leaving it in complete darkness. Then, a new fire was lit up in an important temple. Oh, and there was a blood sacrifice, because of course there was. And finally, from this massive bonfire, all torches and fireplaces were lit up again, filling the city with new light. So in conclusion, the Aztec/Mexica calendar consists of two calendars, each with a specific purpose. The Tonalpohualli, the divinity calendar, was read by priests and consisted of 260 days. The Xiuhpohualli was the solar or the civilian calendar, made of 365 days. It included the cecempohuallapohuallio and the Nemontemi. When the Tonalpohualli and the Xiuhpohualli synchronized once every 52 years, it was called the Xiuhnelpilli, or the binding of years. This resulted in a large celebration called the New Fire Ceremony. I know that it can all sound a bit complicated, but let's put it this way. If the shoe was in the other foot, the Aztecs would find our method of timekeeping clunky and unsophisticated. Some months have 30 days, others 31, and one has 28. And to make matters worse, we are keeping an unending count of our years. Yeah, our calendar leaves a lot to be desired. For our favorite cycle-loving, everything must be mathematically relevant, ancient civilization. But hey, at least we have leap years, and daylight savings time. And time zones?